Sometime in the very near future, meaning this summer, perhaps fall, the Japanese are going to take steps that will result in the sterilization of the vast majority of Asia, if not the entire world. I'm sure a lot of people are probably scratching their heads right now. Wait a minute. Fukushima was way back in 2011. I thought that was way over. Well, it isn't. Since 2011, the Japanese have been pumping water into that reactor because they've never been able to get to it. They've just had to keep it cooled. The problem is when you pump water into a nuclear reactor, it contaminates the water. And they have had to store all of this water ever since then for the last 12 years. They have a plan now to pump that water back into the ocean. They say it's safe. It's not. And we're going to cover this. This might be the single most important video I've ever done. Everything else pales in comparison to this. Real quick, though, just want to say thank you. As always, I know we talk about this every day. I wouldn't talk about this every day if it wasn't critically important to the survival of the channel going forward. And that's not exaggerating. This is what's going on YouTube. It's only $1. The lowest allowable level that I can charge. Over there, we have videos where we can talk about things in a very frank way. The story here today on YouTube, though, is probably going to outstrip all of those, but I could definitely use your support. That $1 would make a huge difference in my life. It's fully refundable, by the way. First 3 months, and that 3 months rolls on, by the way. There's always a 3-month period where you can always get that money back if you would need that $3. There's a $5 level as well if you want to support. Whatever level you want to, you can. But we have Vimeo to stay away from the censoring eyes of Google. Not to waste a lot of your time, but here's what's going on. Let's get everyone up to speed on what happened back in 2011 and why it's still going on. Massive earthquake, coast of Japan. Virtually everybody's heard about it. The ground around this nuclear reactor, Fukushima, Japan, sunk and all of the safeguards collapsed. And they could not cool the reactor anymore. And it went critical and they had to start pumping water in. And people had to go in. Many died. Many died. They had radiation poisoning as far away as Tokyo. And the ongoing effects of Japan have been largely suppressed. But there's been these stories in the last year or two about the catastrophic decline in the birth rate in all of Japan to where it's not even sustainable. We'll talk about that at the end. That's the least of our worries right now. You see, they've pumped these giant tanks of water full of this contaminated water they've been using to cool continually since 2011 this reactor that they have no way of dealing with. Well, now there's a plan, and here's what it looked like right after. They have a plan, because they've been treating these tanks of water, to pump all of this water back into the ocean. And people are losing their mind. Contamination of food and water. Foodstuffs were contaminated by radioactive material that was deposited on leaves or directly on agricultural products, such as fruit and vegetables, or that was absorbed via the roots of fruits and vegetable crops. As a result of the Fukushima accident, not only was radioactive material released into the atmosphere, it's made its all the way to the Arctic Ocean by now, by the way. It also entered the water, primarily the water that was fed into the reactors for emergency cooling, but also the groundwater penetrating into the reactor. Large quantities of contaminated water were pumped out of the reactor, allegedly cleaned of radioactivity by filtering, and stored in numerous tanks on the reactor site. You say, well, if it was cleaned of radioactivity, why are they stored in tanks? Why wouldn't have they pumped it then? You see, they can't decontaminate it. And to give you an idea, the entire discussion around radiation effects has been completely changed by this event in 2011. This is a chart of radiation effects. High risk over here up the top, lower down here. But in the middle, 400 millisieverts, highest hourly radiation recorded at Fukushima. 4 hours exposure would cause radiation sickness. 100 millisieverts, level at which higher risk of cancer is first noticeable. Sterility. Sterility. That's the big key for them. But South Koreans are rushing to stockpile sea salt because they don't know when the Japanese are going to start dumping these millions of tons of water back into the ocean. And everybody asks them the question, if the water is so safe, Japan, why don't you use it to water your own crops? Why don't you use it to create your own reservoirs? Why don't you use it for different things inside the boundaries of Japan? Why do you have to dump it in the ocean if it's so safe? Well, they're talking about the dilution factor, but even the Chinese aren't buying this. And this is one day ago here on YouTube, Shanghai, China, quote, no way to whitewash nuclear wastewater discharge, no matter how Japan touted among NATO and ASEAN. You see, they've gotten the approval from international agencies to do this. Now, how did I come across this? There's a story out of Arizona where farmers in Arizona are seeing their wells go dry because these huge farms purchased by Saudi Arabia are growing alfalfa. Alfalfa requires a ton of water to grow. It's actually illegal to grow alfalfa in Saudi Arabia because of the water usage. So they lease land here in the United States where there's very lax regulations around the use of water, like in Arizona. And it's causing a massive problem. So the only solution for this would, believe it or not, be evil, terrible, horrible socialism, meaning the government of either Arizona or the government of the United States stepping in and saying, okay, hold on. Saudis, we're going to write you a check. We're going to buy this land back from you. And we're not going to allow, basically this is what they call the virtual water trade. What's really being exported in the form of alfalfa to Saudi Arabia is water. What does this have to do with Fukushima? Well, this is what I was looking into, is there's massive shortages of clean water. An aircraft carrier, which we have 19 of, can desalinate from the ocean 200,000 gallons of drinkable water, you ready for this? A day. Now, there are 5,000 men on an aircraft carrier. Let's say you give each one a gallon. Okay? 200,000 gallons is 40 gallons per man. So they could easily go park aircraft carriers all over the world and provide fresh water everywhere. If you want to, instead of setting these things in dry dock, if you want to fix problems in the world, I thought about bringing this up. But that's where I got the story about sea salt, because that would be the byproduct. What would you do with all the sea salt? You pull the water out and you desalinate it. What happens to the salt? Well, the prices of salt are going way up. I was thinking, well, maybe they could sell it on the open market, and that's how I found this out. Fukushima Rao, I guess in this particular case it's pronounced, Hong Kong's Japanese seafood ban necessary if wastewater discharge goes ahead, John Lee tells country's envoy. Now, this is coming out of Hong Kong. So this is a world issue, and I'm sure most of you haven't heard it. You see, this was one of the issues that Washington, D.C., big shock, lied to you about with the story of Venezuela. Remember the story of starving people? Sure, there were huge food shortages, but they didn't tell you that Venezuela imported 96% of its food. Well, why would they do something silly like that? Because the farms were all bought up by big multinational corporations, and the people working on the farms were then put to work on the oil rigs. And all of that land was left fallow so that they could put Venezuela in a vice grip, because they controlled the food supply of Venezuela. So when Venezuela decided not to play ball with Washington, D.C., Washington, D.C. instituted sanctions and banned most of the Western world from even selling food to Venezuela. So Venezuela had a huge sovereign wealth fund, billions of dollars set aside for financial hiccups, but they couldn't buy food anywhere. Nobody was allowed to sell them food except for, you ready for this? those who were not participating in the sanctions laid out by Washington, D.C. Cuba, Iran, China, Russia, and so when Venezuela, being now forced to go to the only remaining sources of food to import, did that, guess what Washington, D.C. and their buddies in the mainstream media rolled out? Oh, Venezuela's now partnering with our enemies, and now they're... You see what they do there? See the game? ECNS Wire, no matter how Japan tries, there's no way to whitewash it. This is another story echoing this, July 21st, 2023. There are huge, huge problems with this. According to media reports, lately the Japanese government has sought to justify its discharge plan at the NATO summit, the ASEAN Plus Ministerials, the Eastern Caribbean Ministerial Meeting on Fisheries and Sustainable Use of Living Marine Resources and so on, while signaling that the discharge scheduled to begin this summer will not be postponed. However, the National Fisheries Cooperative, Federation of Japan, and Fisheries Cooperative Fukushima Miyagi have all reiterated their opposition to the plan. You see, everybody is against this. Everybody is against this. And they said, quote, if the Fukushima nuclear contaminated water is truly safe, Japan wouldn't have to dump it into the sea and certainly shouldn't if it's not. By guarantee, nobody out there has heard this. 80% of Japanese respondents to a recent poll consider the government's explanation over the Fukushima wastewater to be insufficient. 80% of Japanese think their own government is lying. This is what you're not being told. This will cause mass global sterility. Not next year. Not the year after that. 5 years, 7 years, 10 years down the road, you're going to see it in Indonesia. You're going to see it in China. If they go through with this and they dump this water. You think you're seeing fish die-offs now? There are huge fish die-offs in Texas, and that was heat-related. In the Gulf, of course, be nothing compared to what this does. I wonder if it's going to cause sterility in the fish and what happens when fish don't reproduce and the oceans go dead. You see, this is the issue. This is the key. And like I said, I was looking at an entirely different story when I found out what was really going on here. This was being reported nowhere. I was looking into this story out of Arizona because there is an attorney general in Arizona who is a Democrat, by the way, who is trying to stop the Saudis from stealing all of Arizona's water in the form of alfalfa. See, they're not just pumping giant tanks of water into giant tanker ships and then shipping it over to Saudi Arabia. What they're doing is they're taking the water and they're growing alfalfa here that they don't have the water for in Saudi Arabia. Why do they need it? Because they need cattle. And they don't have the ability to grow enough. And the percentages are crazy. It's like 80... What was the number? Let's see if we can find it here. Farm, blah, 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 blah. Okay, here we go. This one farm and the Saudi cows it feeds are not the sole reason Western water suppliers are under pressure. Most hay and alfalfa stays in the United States, yet they have helped highlight what's driving water scarcity around the Colorado River. It's not the lawns that cities like Las Vegas are ordering people to dig up and remove, or the almond milk in millennials' coffee. In the 17 western states, 7% of water is used in people's homes. Commercial and industrial use account for another 5%, but a whopping 86% of water is consumed by crop irrigation, including the 32% of water used to grow crops that humans don't even eat directly, such as alfalfa, hay, and corn silage for livestock. The story of the so-called Saudi water grab is part of what academics call the virtual water trade. While some water is traded directly around the world, think Fiji Flat or San Pellegrino, most traded water is actually embedded in other products, whether alfalfa or semiconductors, which require a lot of water for production, or something like a winter jacket. Well, wait a minute. How does a winter jacket how does that use water? Water is used to drill and refine the natural gas that makes the nylon in the production of the electricity for processing it. So, I'll give you this article from the New Republic about this, where believe it or not, there's a Democrat in Arizona, the attorney general there, who is trying to stand up and do the right thing and stand up against the Saudis. And I'll try to find the other article I was reading about this land was basically given away for a song, and leased away for a song, meaning almost no money, to the Saudis from previous administrations, people that are no longer in office. So they can't be held accountable for it. So this is an Arizona issue, but this is something that, I'm just thinking about it now. I do believe that Restricted Republic, Lisa Haven, Justice Knight, I believe they live in Arizona. So I would love to hear their take on this. Given that this is their backyard and what's going on. So maybe somebody can get the word to them and let them know that there's a major deal going on in their backyard that is absolutely incomprehensible and inexcusable. But the bigger story, the much bigger story, is that the disaster from 2011 is still going on. It hasn't stopped. And you can even see it on Google Earth. In fact, you know what? Let's see if we can find it. Might as well. You can look on Google Earth and you can see the tanks. This is Fukushima. Let's see if we can find the power plant. Here we go. This is number 2. I don't see the tanks here. They must be showing older pictures here. Because at the one power plant, you can see all of the tanks. They're blue, they're light blue. And they're stored all around. Massive tanks. This is TEPCO. I'll find it and we'll put it in another video. Use Google Earth Pro because you can go back and you can see historical pictures. But this is where it is, and this is where they're going to start the dumping. So I will leave it there. But once again, thank you for your support. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't a critical issue at this moment in time. Things on YouTube have just gotten that bad. And if you don't believe me, ask Patriot Nurse, ask anybody who's been doing this for a long time. The collapse is real. So thankfully, I still have 131,000 subscribers. If I even had 2%, I would be okay. I don't even have 2% of my actual subscribers that are at the Patreon channel. So I will leave it there. God bless. Everyone have a wonderful weekend. Be safe. Like, share, subscribe. Pray for each other. Lift each other up. And we'll see you guys next time.